I'm Laurin Mooney. I'm the founder of Be Highly Reliable and Speaking In. And that image right there drives my work. That's the image of 1,000 faces that we'll lose today in healthcare until we do something differently. I also want to point out a difference between the slides that we just saw and the slides here and the slides in Ukraine. Excuse me, I get a little emotional every time. The difference is that the Titanic and Chernobyl and Challenger and Columbia, as horrific and tragic as they were, are over, and we have learned and we have grieved. But this is going to happen every single day, as you heard from Dr. Graber, until we learn to do things differently. So my premise to you is that there's 3 things that we have to do if we want these events to stop occurring. The first thing we need is people with the heart to tell the story. And that means the courage and the determination and the resources and the focus, sharing, extra energy of their lives. And we have 2 of them here today, so I'm really honored that we're going to be introducing them. The second is we have got to equip people to navigate the challenges of complexity and the uncertainty and unexpected events that occur. And thirdly, we need to design our systems so that they can flex and adapt to these unexpected events. So the first of the 2 people that I'd like to introduce who have the heart to tell the story is straight from NASA, Chris Hansen. He's in charge of all the extravehicular activities at the space station, which means the walks, and he's responsible for all the walking and driving that they're going to be doing on the moon. Come on up, Chris.
Thanks, Lauren. So it's interesting. The first question is, for me, is kind of, well, I want to thank Beth first, Beth and Lauren, for inviting me here to talk to you. So the real question is, why am I here to talk to you? I don't share much in common with your industry. We're from a different place, but there's a couple of reasons. And one of them you saw in the montage, unfortunately, was the Columbia accident. So that day I actually saw it happen. I actually saw 2 people I knew, I worked with, I was friends with, actually died in front of my face. We were on February 1st, 2003. I was actually driving north on Interstate 45 in Houston, heading to the airport, and the Columbia vehicle was re-entering at that point above North Texas, just over Dallas. And we saw it happen. Had no idea what we were looking at until we got to the airport and saw the TV screens. And so we take this very personally, what we're doing. That's the first thing. The second reason that's important to me is that we had an event that happened at NASA. Maybe you don't know about it because we're gonna talk to you about it. But a lot of you know our history. Our history is we've killed 17 astronauts from the Apollo 1 fire, the Challenger accident, the Columbia accident, through mistakes that we've made. And when we got involved with this next incident that we're going to talk to you about here in a few minutes, as we were doing the investigation, we started looking at what the root causes were. And what we found were echoes of Columbia and Challenger and the Apollo 1 fire. And I started asking myself, really, and I wasn't an expert, I'm just an engineer, why do we keep seeing these same things happen again and again? And the best I could get anybody to tell me was that for us to learn these lessons, we have to internalize them. We have to realize that the people that are at risk here are brothers and sisters and sons and daughters. And one of the things I share in comments, it was fascinating to me to listen to the last 2 speakers. I share something else in common with them. It was clear when I listened to them talk that they are very passionate about what they're talking about. The people, the children that died, that they talked about, it meant something to them. It's the same with me. The astronauts mean a lot to me. It's part of our job to keep them alive. And so that's really important. And so we made a story. So we investigated this incident we're going to talk about. And so why am I here talking to you about it? One of the things that's interesting is Dr. Graber actually made a comment that he said that the human systems that you guys deal with in the medical community are far more complex than anything we deal with in the aerospace industry. And I agree with him 100%. They're incredibly, incredibly complex. So one of the things I like about spacesuits is that we have the human bodies inside, and it makes our systems not only very complex technical machines, we have an even more complex human inside of them that has to survive what we're asking them to do. So the thing that's in common between all of us is that fundamentally, when we look at these accidents, these mishaps, these problems, it comes down to the people. And we share that in common. The issues we have, the problems we have are all about the people at its root core. We are the strongest part of the system as well as the most flawed and weakest part of the system. And so I think lessons that we've learned can help you in all of your businesses with whatever you guys do. And so that's important to me. They didn't pay me to be here. I came here because what you do is important to me. And you guys own the space program, all of you. And so we owe this to you. So when this happened, when this mishap happened, the NASA administrator, Charlie Bolden, actually told me the only way we're going to prevent these kinds of things from happening is to talk about it. And so I took him at his word, and I've been talking about it ever since. This incident happened in 2013, and I have not stopped talking about it. In the process of talking about it, I met a very interesting individual, a guy named Mark Havikin. Mark Havikin was a producer director, came to work for NASA right after the Challenger accident. So he's a filmmaker. Eventually, he left in 1995 to go start his own company to tell our story for us. And Mark heard my story and decided to make a movie out of it. And that's what we're going to show you today. But Mark is here with us today. So Mark.
How y'all doing? You may or may not be able to tell I'm from Texas. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to understand what I say. I'm crossing my fingers. I also talk fast, which is not real good. And the other thing is that I've been involved with the human spaceflight program for a long period of time, well over 30 years. So I also speak NASA. Now, at NASA, we have all kinds of acronyms, right? We try to take these big phrases and make them palatable so that when guys like Chris and I talk, we have sort of a shorthand, things like TDRS or TLI or EVA. Well, the EVA is an extravehicular activity. Well, why don't you just call them spacewalks? Well, because that's just not how we do it. So anyway, I speak Texan, I speak NASA, and I'm hoping that I can somehow communicate with you. And I think maybe the best way to do that is with something that I'm really passionate about, which is storytelling. So if it's okay with you, I want to share a few stories with you. I guess, let me ask you this question. How many here have ever read a story to your son or your daughter or your grandchild or anything like that? Raise your hand. Okay, and how many of you have been on the other side of that, where your parents have read you a story? I want you to put yourself in that position for a minute. Think about that sense of enchantment that your children have, the way they look at you with love in their eyes, the connection that you feel, all of that. I mean, isn't that just a marvelous thing? And we've been telling stories since we were living in caves and hunting and gathering for quite some time. And it's just a part of it. I mean, you look at the pteroglyphs in the cliffs, you look at hieroglyphics in the ancient pyramids. The people have been using stories to connect and bond and be able to share ideas for a long period of time. And that's something I really like to do. And fortunately, I work with Chris who does that. Can you remember sitting around a campfire with a whole bunch of people, either on a Boy Scout trip or a Girl Scout trip, or even with your families, and everybody's roasting s'mores, and they're talking around, and somebody tells a ghost story? Again, it's that sense of connection, that ability to communicate with one another in a way that you just ordinarily can't do, even if you speak Texan and you speak NASA. Now, one of the things I really love is origin stories. How did Kal-El become Superman? How did Bruce Wayne become Batman? How did Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak form Apple Computer? I love origin stories. So with your permission, I'd like to share a little bit of what my origin story. Would that be okay? I know that you're in a hurry to kind of get through this, but if you'll just indulge me for a minute, I hope it sheds a little bit of light on how we came to make EVA 23. Well, as you can tell, I'm Texan. I grew up in Houston in the early 1960s. That means I was around when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I was 9 years old when my mother's brother, Jim Shows, moved to Houston from St. Louis. He was an engineer for McDonnell Douglas. And at that time, they were building the Manned Spacecraft Center just south of Houston. And he moved into a neighborhood called Timber Cove. Now, Timber Cove was where a lot of the astronauts lived. But more importantly, much more importantly, as you'll get to in a moment, The people who lived there were the scientists, the engineers, the project managers, folks like us. And any astronaut will tell you that they're just the pointy end of the rocket. Behind them, Chris will allude to, there's hundreds of thousands of people that make the spaceflight program work. Well, about that time, 9 years old, early 1960s, NASA announced what they called Astro Group 2, or the next 9. These were men like Neil Armstrong and Tom Stafford and Buzz Aldrin, John Young, people like this. These were the guys that worked on the early Gemini programs and ended up commanding missions to the moon. Well, these guys lived in the same neighborhood in Timber Cove. We all knew they were famous because they were on Life magazine. They were on television. Every time they covered a launch, I don't know, well, you guys don't remember this, but when I was like in 3rd grade, they would stop the class and roll a television in so we could see the launches. Do you remember that? You're too young to remember that. That can't be true. But it was just like, it was this major thing, right? We were all connected. We were all bonded. And it was this magnificent thing to see. Well, again, Timber Cove, all these guys were just guys, right? Again, we knew they were famous, but we had barbecues and we played volleyball and we swam and they played catch in the backyard with a football. All this kind of stuff was something else. Growing up on the Texas Gulf Coast, our heroes were our dads and our friends' fathers, not necessarily astronauts, although they were pretty cool. And we emulated them. We all had crew cuts and buzz haircuts, kind of what I look like now, except we did it on purpose. We all wore short cut-off jeans. We didn't wear shirts. We didn't wear shoes. We ran around in the hot Texas sun, swimming in the water, skiing and playing baseball. And we were brown as my grandma's biscuits. We were just roasted. Well, anyway, one Saturday afternoon, we were sitting behind my uncle's house. Jim Lovell's house was right across the street. If you heard Jim Lovell, it's because he was the commander of Apollo 13, played by Tom Hanks in the movie. So we're sitting outside Lovell's house and we're eating ice cream. And it's pretty hot in Texas in the summer, so the ice cream's rolling down our wrists, and we're licking it off. And I look down the street and here comes a CBS truck pulling around the corner. And the CBS, and I'm elbowing my cousin, Doug, and the CBS truck pulls up in front of Lovell's house and out climbs Walter Cronkite. And I'm like freaking out. I'm like, oh, that's Walter Cronkite pulling up in front of Lovell's house. But you know what else was cool? Was all the guys that got out with the cameras and the cables and everything else and pulled him out to Lovell's house to go in to do an interview for his upcoming Gemini flight. Now, in that moment, I felt, I want to do that. I want to do that with my life. And I'm involved in space. I wanted to tell the story. I wanted to work in media, and I'll be dadgummed, Texas word, if I didn't grow up to find out what I was put on this earth to do. I'm really blessed in that regard. And today I'm here to share a little bit of kind of the results of what happened there. Anyway, sorry, I got lost in my notes. 20 years later, that dream came true. For 7 years, as Chris told you, I was a producer director at Johnson Space Center. We became friends with astronauts and all the families, and we became part of a community where you see these folks in the grocery store or at church or at scout meetings or at Little League games. And when I see things like this with Challenger and Columbia, and I see people that I know that we killed in a spacecraft, it's like, I believe it or not, I'm speechless. I know that's hard to believe given all the babbling I'm doing, but it's very difficult for us. So what can we do to prevent that, both in space, and Chris is going to talk about that, and also in what you do. Anyway, in July of 2013, 2 other men that we knew floated out of an airlock on the International Space Station. And they began what we thought was just a routine EVA, extravehicular activity. Well, we soon found out that it wasn't routine. And as Chris says in the film, we like boring EVAs. Nonetheless, I won't give away what's happening in the film, but after this was over with, Chris was appointed the head of the Mishap Investigation Board. I mean, you guys have no idea what a great speech you're in for when he gets up here and tells you. Chris and I crossed paths in 2015 a couple of times. And then it was October 2017, Chris was presenting to a group of people at Space, and two of my staff were there to shoot and record his thing, and they came back and they were lit up. Mark, you got to hear this guy talk, man. You wouldn't believe the story he's telling. Well, I knew about the spacewalk. I just didn't know how close we came to killing one of the best astronauts I know, Luca Parmitano. Fortunately, he was on the EVA with Chris Hansen, Chris Cassidy, who Chris Hansen will tell you is probably the best spacewalking astronaut we've ever had. Anyway, I'm not going to bore you with all the sausage making and how we got there and any of that kind of stuff. I'll let you see the movie. And then if you'd like to ask any more questions, we can talk about that at the end of the film. But this film has been shown in IMAX theaters. It's been shown at theaters across the country. Chris uses it regularly when he goes out and talks to people. And I'd like to think that we've had some sort of impact in helping people learn what happened. Laurin, I want to thank you and Beth for inviting us here and allowing me to get up here and talk Texan to these people for a little bit. So I'm going to sit down. Laurin and Beth are going to come back. They're going to lead you into the film. And I just want to tell you all that I really, really genuinely hope you enjoy this movie. It would mean the world to me. And see you later.
Thank you, Mark. Uh-oh. Okay, so I can do this. Okay, you have heard this a few times. And I want to even build on what Mr. Todd Conklin said. This is a little model I made of why in the world do we keep having these events? What are we up against? So in my little model here, not only do you have a VUCA world in the center, I give people their own circle. And there we have fabulous, fallible, and free-willed human beings coming to work as humans, which is the only way they can. And then they go out and they build their complex socio-technical systems. And we have boats and we have planes and we have hospitals. And all of these things are actually spinning like roulettes. And we never actually know. And sometimes they align so beautifully and something wonderful happens and we skirt disaster, and other times we don't. But one thing I know is if I'm going to live in an uncertain world, the person I want with me is right here, Beth Lay, Queen of Questions, winner of the World's Most Inclusive Leader Award. Not really, but by me, and a tireless promoter of the benefits that resilience engineering can bring to your work. So yay for Beth. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get going real quick so we can get to the movie. First thing, what we're gonna be doing is exploring the dark space. And the dark space is the ambiguity, uncertainty, and unexpected events that come up because of that model that I just showed you. Now you have worksheets in front of you. If you don't have one, raise your hand, and two staff members are going to come by, board member, famous people are coming by to give you your sheet. Okay, and let's see. So here we go, Beth.
Okay, so Laurin is talking about the dark space. We're going to be exploring the dark space together today. The dark space is essentially what Todd opened up the conference with. It's that world that we live in, the uncertainty and ambiguity and the unexpected. So today, we're actually going to take this to a really practical level. Many of you are probably familiar with Todd's bow tie model. On the right is predict, on the other side is prepare. Prepare for the unexpected. Often when we think about preparing for the unexpected, we think about the actions that we're going to take after something bad happens. But what we're going to talk about today is preparing to notice better, preparing to act when this unexpected event is going on, and as well, how to respond in a more robust way. We're going to actually explore 4 challenges of the dark space. And you've got a strategy sheet that is part of your handout that we'll go through later. But you can refer to that as we go through the presentation. So the 4 challenges of the dark space are that something is unexpected, of course, right? The second challenge is that there are often small signals that show up before whatever unexpected happens. The third challenge is that something is unclear. And when something's unclear, it's really kind of interesting about that because psychologically, we as human beings are uncomfortable with uncertainty. So we have a tendency to just rush on by it and not even pay attention to it and try to categorize things too early. The fourth one is that time matters. And time matters a lot. And this is actually where we're getting into some of the ideas of resilience engineering, where we talk about it's really important that we pay attention to the rate of change. Time may seem like it's speeding up or slowing down or even stopping. So we're going to give you strategies to work with each of those. In your packet, you have a what did you notice worksheet. So as you watch the movie, we're going to ask you to fill out the worksheet. And then after the movie, we'll have a quick table session. I think everything is pretty self-explanatory except the one, how did they act to learn? And acting to learn simply means taking deliberate action to figure out what's going on in an ambiguous situation. So with that, oh, hang on a second. There we go. We're ready for the movie. So now we'll take 5 minutes and talk at our tables about what you noticed during the film. So you have the what you noticed worksheet. So take 5 minutes and talk at your table about what you noticed. And then we'll have Chris share with us what he noticed. Okay, let's come back together. Let's come back together. And Chris is going to share with you what he observed during the movie.
Yeah, I wanted to mention to you guys too, at the end, we've left some time for Q&A. We should have about 15 or 20 minutes. If you have questions for me, anything from the event, the movie, whatever else you have, I'll be happy to answer, and I'll be around all the rest of the day too. So if you guys want to yell answers tonight, I'll kind of read this the way I saw it. So what was unexpected? I think this one's a little bit obvious. Obviously, water in the helmet during a spacewalk. If you've ever been in a spacesuit, you ever get the chance, the last thing you want in there with you is water. Trust me. The other interesting thing for us was the CO2 sensor failure. We heard in the last thing the comment about normalization and deviance. This is a classic case of that because we have issues with our CO2 sensor failing. So when it failed, everyone's like, no big deal. That was a big miss on our part. What was unclear? Where was the water coming from? There's only so many sources of water in a spacesuit, and none of them are good, pretty much. Was it dangerous? You know, it took us 23 minutes to talk about water. Now, was he in danger? Hell yeah, he was in danger. No doubt about it. Took us a while to kind of figure that out. So that was not clear to us. How fast was the situation degrading? You heard them kind of ask him, hey, Luca, is it getting worse? Is it getting worse? Is it getting worse? Actually, if you go through the whole sequence of events, you hear that Luca doesn't want to say it's getting worse because they know as soon as he does, they're going to send him inside. And sure enough, as soon as he said it was getting worse, they sent him inside. What did they think or say? It's probably just, this one's obviously heard it too. They asked it was a drink bag. That's the big one. We're going to talk a little bit about EVA 22. That's a little bit kind of a smaller case of normalization to deviance. Yeah, and then the CO2 sensor. Yep. It's just normal.
Was that sensor bad? Did they check it out?
No, sensors. Well, yes and no. We can talk about that.
Okay.
It was wet. Doesn't like getting wet.
Doesn't like water.
Yep, doesn't like water. Or the signs that things were taking a turn for the worse.
Increasing water.
It was getting worse. Yep.
Get in his ear cup.
Yep. He was having trouble with his comm system. And to me, you could hear it. When Luca gets back to the airlock, it sounds like he's underwater. You know, at that point, that's where we on the ground started going. We had no idea Luca was in trouble until that point. And even then, most of us didn't know until he got in the airlock and Chris said, hey, Luca, are you okay? And you hear nothing. That's when we were really worried on the ground about Luca. How do we act to learn? Good point. I didn't even think about that one. Yep, that's a good one. He did suck down the water in the drink bag. Get rid of that. Didn't help, but they were trying. Some of it was the questioning. You heard Shane Kimber, who's another astronaut. He was the Capcom during this flight. You heard him asking, hey, Luca, where do you think the water's coming from? How you doing? Those kinds of things. You also don't see it in the movie, but I've listened to hundreds of hours of the ground team. We record all of the ground team comm. Lots of conversations going on between the engineers on the ground. Where do you think the water is coming from? What's the telemetry telling you? What's the suit telling you? What do you guys think it is? There's a lot of that going on, even outside of what you could see in the film. And how did time matter? Obviously, we have limited resources to stay outside in a suit. He's only got so much air, so much time. He's 10 minutes away from the only safe place for him, which is inside that airlock with it repressed. So if he has trouble getting there, he does not have much time to deal with that. So we're clearly in a very stressed situation when it comes to time. Water was encroaching on Luca's airway. He said any scuba divers in here? You can breathe with water in your nose, but it's really uncomfortable. Takes a lot of practice and they make you train it. Luckily, all these guys are scuba certified. Luca had water up his nose. He was totally blind, totally deaf, couldn't hear anything, and he had no idea where he was. He was totally lost. Most of you, me for sure, would have been in trouble at that point. So Luca actually did a great job. So that's what I list. Any other comments people found that I didn't mention? Yeah, it's so funny when you hear them tell that story, Luca, because I had no idea why the hell he was squeezing my hand. I just was happy he was there. So that's what Luca says. He was, yeah.
You know, back to the learning piece that they said it shouldn't be a suit, but when you roll out all the probable, it has to be the improbable.
Yep. It's a question of the time. You've got 15 minutes to do all that diagnosis, and you really have very limited information coming to us on the ground. So,
Hey,
all
I got a question. I actually got a microphone too, so now everything's off. Did he wait too long in hindsight because he didn't want to end the EVA? Like he really.
you're talking Luca?
Yeah. In other words, you know, when the first time of trouble, do you think he should have gone in hindsight?
We cannot count. We select astronauts for their ability to, by God, they're going to do everything it takes to get their job done. We should not count on our astronauts to make that call. It is our job to protect them from themselves. We failed him, not the other way around. No doubt about it. All right, and again, you will have more time to talk about this at the end, hopefully. So, thanks.
Okay, so we're going to revisit some of that. Oh, there we go. So when I first saw this film, I said, how could anyone write a film to illuminate high reliability organizing that well? And I had already looked at all the concepts and practices, and I was pretty darn determined to get this put together so we can go over some high reliability and resilience engineering things. And the first thing is a quote, which is a premise of high reliability organizing. The point is, we actually live in a world where we cannot write, we cannot write procedures to anticipate all the situations and conditions that shape people's work. So then what are we going to do? We cannot write plans and policies. What we're going to have is strategies. We're going to have strategies for the ambiguity, uncertainty, and unexpected. We're going to have language to talk about it. We're going to have, and that's what we're introducing with the dark space and some of the language today that's simple. And we're going to have people equipped with what are the helpful and unhelpful responses when we're in these situations, and they need to know them ahead of time. So that's what we're going to do today. And I'm afraid of this microphone now. To do that, my position, and probably a lot of you here, is that we need individual transformation before we have system transformation. So once you're transformed into someone who understands uncertainty and ambiguity, you can start transforming your system so that it can align with it. So in your packet is also a transformation template, as I call it. And as we teach you these strategies, transformation is really just acquiring new ways of thinking, being, speaking, and doing. So you'll see yourself as a little being there. So maybe there's some new ways you want to be, you'll pick up new things you might want to say, and new things you might want to do. And of course, we have it all summed up from your strategy sheet at the end. Okay, so after we transform folks, then we're going to need systems, leadership, and a culture that's going to actually support the kind of responses that we're talking about today. So where do we start? I'm going to go fast. We have even more time to talk to Chris. We have to embrace this statement, I believe. More is possible than we can ever plan for or imagine. The word possibilities is, if I could take one word away from high reliability and resilience engineering, it's about the word possibilities, but not just the word. It's the point that you can actually improve your relationship with possibilities and have better outcomes. So where does a world of possibilities land us? On what I call, because you have to have one, if you're going to speak, you have to have an iceberg. So my iceberg, of course, has animals like everything else I do. It lands us on the iceberg of knowledge. And the reality is, the chilling fact is that what we know is so much less than what we don't know. So we are really just like those penguins up top. And the way I kind of dove in and began a life of exploring the possibilities under the water. It started in 2014. I was in a hospital room with my brother-in-law. The doctors came in and said, we're really sorry, but he's dying in septic shock and we can't save him. And I looked at 2 4-year-old twins' pictures on the wall and I said, no, I believe that his gallbladder is infected and we are not going to let him die while we're watching. We need to try. And I convinced them to tap his gallbladder. He went down there on 2 life-saving blood pressure medications and a temperature of 104.5. He came out 40 minutes later. The radiologist said, I think you found what you were looking for. And 4 hours later had no fever and it turned around. And that was the moment that I knew that acting to learn was real. I spent 1 month in that ICU, hoping that it was for a greater purpose. There were multiple instances where I had to stop preventable harm. And so that's what I had been out of nursing for 20 years. Yeah, no, 15 years at that point. And I said, now I'm going back in and I'm going in as a detective and I'm going to find the answer to this question. How in the world can it be that we are harming the very people we're trying to help? I mean, you want to talk about a failure. Not only did we not help you, we accidentally killed you. We harmed you for life. So it's going to take a village, as you saw Dr. Graber to say today, we need help. Okay, so here's what happened. I dove in, I made a database of 353 cases of preventable harm. They were some of the worst cases, all done by one expert witness. It was the darkest winter I had ever had. And what I saw were patterns. And I know that almost all of you have looked back at events. So I'm going to quickly run through these and tell me if they ring a bell with you. First off, what I saw, case after case, something was unseen. Looking back, the signals were there, but they didn't see them in the moment. And if they had, they would have done something. Second, unclear. That's your ambiguity. So they did see something, but they didn't know what it was. They were supposed to make sense of it, and the sense they made of it was inaccurate. Third, unstable. So that's something that shows up in your work. Bigger, smaller, faster, slower than you were expecting, and your systems and your people are not ready. That's where the resilience engineers kick in. Something I'm taking on in my other business, huge problem. Unspoken and unheard, 2 most dangerous dynamics in any organization. I say solve them first. Unspoken is present in almost every single healthcare failure. Untimely, there's your clock, and unimagined, and that's your true unexpected. And in our workshop the other day, I asked them, which do you think you see the most? And they said unimagined. So that's a core tenet of high reliability. So knowing how to navigate these things, since this iceberg is not melting, is critical. So, how do we do that? That's where Beth kicks in.
So how do we do that? That's a great question, Laurin. So I'm going to share with you some practices that we've been implementing at Lewis Tree. I'm the Director of Safety and Human Performance at Lewis Tree. We do line clearance work, which is essentially clearing trees away from power lines while they're live. So you can imagine we're up there with a chainsaw near a live power line. Often we've climbed the tree, or perhaps we're working in a bucket truck. So line clearance is among the most dangerous work in the US. And we also we're first responders for storm. Our work has very few procedures, and we work in one of the most highly variable, dangerous environments that exist. We have a few critical policies that we follow. So we've gone down this journey, a resilience engineering journey, trying to figure out how we work in that highly variable environment. And when you're doing safety in a highly variable environment, it changes almost everything. So what I'm going to share with you today are some real practices that we've implemented and what we think is working. So I'm going to share with you right now. Okay, so let's go back to Todd Conklin, our hero, right? So Todd wrote a book on fatality prevention, and I was actually on my way to investigate a really serious event where we had a person struck by wood, and I'm reading that book on the way, and I had a bit of an aha moment. So I've been in my role for about 3 years. I've always worked in the energy industry, but when I started this role, one of the first questions I asked, or was started to ask, was, what do we need to focus on, right? How do we differentiate what's high risk so that we can begin to manage it differently? And the answer I heard time and time again is that everything we do is high risk. And I was stuck. I was like, okay, I don't know what to do with that. So I'm I'm headed to investigate this incident, and I'm reading the book. And I realized that I had been asking the wrong question all along. The question was really a question of control. And so one of the things that Todd says, and I believe he may have even said it, on the first day here, the things that kill workers are not the things with the highest perceived risk. The things that kill workers are the things that are most difficult to control. So the things that kill workers are where the workers have the most uncertainty. So we invented an uncertainty gauge. And you can kind of think of it as like a speedometer. It's a visual representation of how uncertain someone's feeling. So on the left side, a number 1 in uncertainty means that they're pretty certain that they can bring this tree down in a controlled manner. So they have a lot of controllability and they have a good plan and they can bring it down in a controlled manner. If it's a 10, what it means is they're highly uncertain and there are things about that tree or that situation that they know they can't control. So I want to give you some examples of how we're working with this uncertainty gauge. And we've been working with this idea for at least a year now, maybe more. And so we're turning in a ton of close calls. So the comments I'm going to read you are from our recent close call review. So we had a split tree and it was pressed into another tree and hanging over a 3-phase power line. The trimmer said, as I started my finished cut, the cut started closing up. Danger intensified. My uncertainty gauge skyrocketed. Second close call. He came across one tree that was stone dead, no hanging the lines. He used his uncertainty gauge and he called it a 6. And he called me. After examining the tree, we determined it was not safe to cause any movement at all with that tree. They couldn't even put a rope in it. They noticed, this is close call number 3. They noticed the primary conductor was frayed and a heavy pull was on the line. The crew felt uncertainty and requested the GF to inspect the wires for a second opinion. Close call number 4. There was heavy foliage. We had a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's in those areas. Close call number 5. Working a storm event. We dispatched an experienced crew for the job. The limb was on the primary. It was a large leader, a multi-stem maple. If we removed the tension, the wire could snap up and cause an outage. The crew was feeling uncertainty and reached out. They would have given it a 7. So what we found is that our leaders are determining what number they want to be called at. They know their crews, they know the work, and they're all judging what number they want to be called. And when the crews call the leaders, they're not calling them to get permission. They're calling them to get that fresh set of eyes. They're calling them and expecting their general foreman to have options ready to do the job more safely.
Okay. So Beth at her company is elevating the discussion and the awareness and the mindfulness of how much uncertainty they're actually working in. And another important step as we go through the characteristics that's very foundational to why does this all keep happening? It has to do with the funny thing about plans. So plans in the dark space, where do plans come from? They're really nothing more than your expectations. So you have an idea of how the world is going to unfold. And notice you're smiling at this point. But what really happens, so you go ahead and you take your plans and you type them up and you put them in binders, because if you're 57 like me, you're going to put them on a shelf, right? But then they don't only go into a shelf. What happens is that your plans slide right down over your eyes and become like what I say, not just blinders, but binders. So now you're working with your binders, your plan binders on. And these plan binders have some very funny and dangerous pitfalls. And this is why we tend to not notice unexpected events and we don't realize how much uncertainty we're in. And I'm going to read you a quick quote because it's such a strong position from high reliability organizing. You wouldn't believe it if I didn't quote it. A heavy investment in plans restricts sensing to the expectations built into the plans, restricts responding actions into the repertoire. The result is a system that is less able to sense discrepancies, less able to update an understanding and learn, and less able to recombine activities in new ways to handle the unexpected. Said more simply, that's a really strong statement, but it's something we need to keep in balance as we work in this unpredictable world. They're limited because they're based on what we already know. They're limiting because they give us tunnel vision and we see what we expect to see, and they're lulling because by Monday, Tuesday, your plans work great. On Wednesday, you're falling into autopilot because you think Wednesday is going to just be another day like the rest. So, however, no matter how many beautiful plans we make,
No matter how many plans we make, we will be surprised. And so an over reliance on plans can make us vulnerable, as Laurin just shared with us. We can prepare to be surprised. So I know that sounds strange. And I know when I've said that before, folks would be like, what? How do you do that? So I'm going to share with you again a really practical example from Lewis on how we are preparing to be surprised. We routinely ask, what surprised you? And in fact, we probably ask that question so often that folks laugh about it a little bit because it's very, very common in our language. When we talk about building systems to handle the unexpected, one of the things that we have done is we've added that question, what surprised you, into our after action reviews, into our incident reviews, and into our close call reviews. So then what? We take our answers to that question, and it helps us understand the general shape of surprise. So one example of that is the way that we're most likely to be killed or seriously injured is being hit by a falling branch or a falling tree. And one of the things that we found is the answer to that question. We looked at about 50 close calls and incidents of being struck by wood. And the thing that surprised people almost every single time was how fast it happened. So the answers to that question help us notice a couple of things. One is how often we're surprised. And the other thing is, now that we know that the general shape of surprise for that particular risk is how fast it happens, then it becomes even more critical that we have an escape path and that we make sure people are clear before we make our back cut.
okay.
Beth,
So
I was gonna add one thing on
Yeah.
that one. So when we do EVAs, we do very, very detailed procedures. But we also probably have an even bigger set of what we call contingency procedures that we try to think about everything that can go wrong at every step of the typical standard procedures. And we write down and we get the community together to talk about what would we do in that case and what are the steps we would take. We go into those contingency procedures pretty frequently. And after every EVA, we do reviews of the things that did happen. Were there any contingencies that happened that we didn't account for ahead of time? And we try to, that's a knowledge we build up every time we do an EVA.
Yep. So unfortunately,
Still you.
Oh yeah, so this was kind of the weak signals. I want to tell you a quick story about EVA 22. They talked about it in the movie just a little bit. So Luca had never done an EVA before. So Chris and Luca went out. When they were coming back in, they were repressing the airlock. Luca had mentioned that he sensed a lot of water in his helmet, was condensing as the pressure's going up. That's not in and of itself a big issue. There was a lot more than he expected. And he was thinking, wow, maybe I just didn't get enough training. Maybe this is normal and I just don't know. He kept that to himself. He didn't say anything. And at one point he was leaning over and you saw that drink bag that sits on his chest. You saw a little bit of water come out of the nozzle of the drink bag. So after they got his helmet off and they found the water, most of our flight control team had left. There were not very many people left on the loops talking. There were probably a dozen people in this conversation. They asked Luca, where do you think the water came from? And he's like, I don't know, but I was at one point kind of leaning over and I saw a little water come out of the drink bag. Maybe that was it. So when the flight controller said, Luca, how much water did you drink? And Luca said, I didn't drink at all. The bag holds about 1 liter of water. They found about half a liter of water in his helmet. Well, if Luca didn't drink any of it and it came from there, they were kind of doing math in their head going, oh, that kind of makes sense. Turns out after hours and hours of listening to audio tapes, you heard Luca, he's got a bit of an accent. He speaks English really well, but he's got a little accent. It's not what he said at all. What he said is, I didn't drink it all. That means something very different. In fact, so the first thing that happened was Luca's flight docs got mad at him because Luca is actually an Ironman triathlete. He's one of the fittest people on the planet. He knows he has to drink water, and he in fact had drank most of the water out of that drink bag. That message, though, that they heard, the one flight control on the ground heard, was that, oh, well, it makes sense that the water came out of the drink bag. Therefore, we're going to swap the drink bag on the next EVA. And you just heard the entire investigation that happened after EVA 22. Wasn't the drink bag. We tested that drink bag after EVA 23. Didn't leak at all. Wasn't the drink bag. And we missed the opportunity right there It was, in fact, his suit was failing and it was talking to us and we missed it completely. That was a very, I'll say, kind of weak signal that we missed. The suit was trying to tell us something was going wrong and we missed it.
Exactly. It shows up not like a big billboard, but like a very, Chris just, I should have probably advanced that earlier, but you're not going to get a billboard. You're going to get a small sign or a weak signal. And one of the biggest differences in high reliability is how you respond to that weak signal. It's so easy to dismiss. It's so easy to delay. Instead, we take signals like we see that Beth will talk about, and we mount a strong response.
Yeah. So in resilience engineering, we talk a lot about monitoring for anomalies, and we're also really paying attention to how close we get to safety boundaries. So we study how early we noticed something and how we responded. And Chris, I think you have an example of getting close to a safety boundary, right? We talked about that yesterday.
Which one?
The one with water. Another incident with water in the suit.
The current one?
Yeah. But if you're ready, if you want to talk about it, it's fine. If not, it's also okay.
Let's come back to that.
We'll come back to that. Okay, we'll come back to that.
All right, so here, we're gonna speed up here. Whoopsie, not that fast. So the number one unhelpful thing, no dismissing. It gets the orange cross through and it gets a red X. It's so easy. It's your go-to, right? That's a no. Here's what's helpful.
So here's what's helpful. And what is helpful is noticing and embracing uncertainty as a signal. So this is definitely a resilience engineering idea, is that you embrace uncertainty as a signal. So I'm going to give you some examples again from Lewis and how we're embracing uncertainty as a signal. One of the things that we do is we want to notice when we're feeling uncertain. And so we talk a lot about trusting your gut, but beyond that, we also train our folks on noticing certain words and expressions such as I've never seen, we've never done, we're going to go real slow here, which might indicate that you're feeling uncertain. We've also talked to folks about noticing certain gestures and expressions. The gesture of having your hand on your chin, for example, would indicate that you're feeling uncertain. If you're feeling tightness in your chest, that also could indicate that you're feeling uncertain. So I'm going to give you an example. Okay, another close call. And this was a part of a close call conversation. The plan changed from trimming the tree to removing it. The foreman said you could tell the climber who was in the tree was nervous after the plan changed. He said, I called an all-stop and brought the climber down. I think if the trimmer proceeded, that we could have had an accident. He said, you can tell if a person is nervous and unsure. So I asked him, how could you tell the person was uncertain? And what he said was that he was second guessing every cut. He was taking a long time to reset. He was looking up and stalling, second guessing, and resituating. So what I would invite you to do is figure out what uncertainty looks like in your work, in your environment, and then help your folks notice it, treating uncertainty as a signal. So you're getting that signal that folks are uncertain. Now what?
I'm way too enthusiastic about this clicker. You need to then recognize exactly where you are. You're facing, if this signal is unclear, you have to recognize you're actually in the sense-making process. When Dr. Graber talked about the doctors having trouble synthesizing and bringing the information together, failure to diagnose properly is a sense-making process. No decision has been made yet. So you have to figure out what your signal means, and then you have to put it in a cup. Now, the key thing is as you receive that weak signal, you've got to welcome it in, right? Not dismiss it. Take a minute and carefully put it in what I call your category cup there. And then always, always be willing to update it. Not saying, oh, I was wrong, I had the wrong cup, but saying, you know what, I have new information, so I have to move that. So you have to remember, yes, make a category, because an unhelpful thing when we're in ambiguity is actually inaction. And this is where you get all the delay. And then I'm going to give you my favorite easy language thing of, instead of inaction, here's what we want you to do. Here's what they did in the film. Act to learn. This is a very powerful strategy when things are unclear. So there you are, you're standing by a pond, there's a bump, And you don't know whether this is an old basketball, a rock, or a turtle. You could stand there all day if you were a naturalist. However, if you work in high-risk work, that's not a safe thing to do. What you need to do is find a safe way to probe the situation. So here, you picked up a stick and you poked the bump. And whoa, man. And what do you know? The turtle raises his head and says, hey, well, you've acted to learn, you have engaged in the situation. It's technically called enactment. You've acted to learn, and now you have more clarity. One more, so we saw this, and these guys did not have a plan. They had to act to learn. It wasn't for all the plans you had. They had to do two things in one event to act to learn. Next thing, invite diverse perspectives. We've been hearing this all week. This is a person asking others, hey, what do you see? It would really help me to know. He's signaling that I'm going to welcome and appreciate the information.
Can I make
Okay.
a comment here on this one?
Yeah.
This is a really important chart to me, diversity. We talk about diversity a lot. And when we talk about diversity, a lot of times we talk gender diversity, we talk racial diversity, and those things are really important. The most important thing, though, is what we call cognitive diversity. It is about bringing people together that have different backgrounds, different cultures, different languages, different educations. One of the cool things here is we have people from different fields, different backgrounds. What we have found at NASA is that diversity is not just about being fair to people. It is an incredibly powerful tool that we underutilize. You can solve really complex problems much, much more quickly if you bring in people that don't think alike, that don't think the same way as you do, that have different educations, different backgrounds. Use that tool. We encourage that. We've learned that at NASA. We are doing a better job at that. When we have critical problems, we bring in lots of people from different areas, diverse backgrounds. Embrace that. It's a really powerful tool. When you guys are struggling in your industry to solve a hard problem, bring in people who don't look at that problem every day, day to day, have different backgrounds, different ways of approaching it. They will ask questions and very quickly get to places that you never would have got to without their help.
So I'm going to add the Lewis Tree perspective to that one as well. So the way that we talk about this is the power of perspective, and we talk about it as you just shared, Chris, but we also talk about it from a location standpoint. So what we say is everything looks different when you're in the tree. So what does it look like when you're on the ground? What does it look like when you're in the tree? So it's actually a physical change in location to bring diverse perspectives.
Okay, so diverse perspectives are your go-to. Here's your nemesis. We do not have time to, oh my goodness, time to go into this, but please be aware of these dynamics as you're trying to make sense of things and you want to bring people around. There's some dynamics that block your ability to make sense in the moment of unclear situations. And some of those are, starting with our guy with the hands in the air, production pressure. We don't have time for this unclear situation. Person with the blindfold has one of our natural biases. Up top, we have an orange person afraid to speak. We've got a checked out person. We've got someone dismissing with it's probably just, a leader who's not listening, and one guy who just is angry. All of these things hold back knowledge flow in an organization and limit your diverse perspectives. We want every one of those people free to speak, and that's the leader's job. Okay, so what do we do, Beth and Chris?
Well, one of the things that we do is unlock sense making. So when we were in Storm in Louisiana last year, one of our leaders on Storm asked this question like every day, twice a day. What are my blind spots? What are my blind spots? So when we're in Storm or a high risk situation, it's a really common question for our leaders to ask over and over. The other thing that we want to do is leaders want to look for disconfirming evidence. What else could it be? What's different? Because we believe that risk hides in the differences. And Chris, do you have some examples from NASA?
Yeah, so some of it's cultural. I think a lot of this is cultural. It's about setting the expectation within your company that you're expected to ask questions, that you're expected to challenge. We were not that way for a long time. A lot of you, I know we were talking last night, some folks worked sort of the post-Columbia era. The Columbia accident really changed the culture of NASA dramatically. And since that time, my career has kind of spanned over that. There have been some major changes that our safety organizations have become much more powerful, much more involved, much more engaged in the work that we do, much more a part of the team rather than this external organization that's there as kind of the policeman for for the activities that we do. Rather than being the policeman, they are actually integrated into our teams, and their job is to help us be successful in the mission and to do that safely. And so a lot of it is, I think, just setting that culture, that asking questions. You mentioned looking for things that don't fit the patterns. I think we've sort of embraced that culturally much better in the last decade or so.
Yeah, that actually brings up another Lewis practice. We hire safety from the field. So we want our safety professionals to be people who've done the work so that they can actually recognize the risks with our highly variable work.
I have to back up one slide. This is, if you don't pick up one strategy from this today, please take this. It's the most awesome place to start noticing possibilities at work. This phrase right here, it's probably just is the most dangerous 3-word phrase in complex work. And because I talked about possibilities, what's happening here is you're sensing that there are possibilities, but yet you're staying in that probability. And I can guarantee you're going to pick something simple. You're going to pick something that happens all the time. And you have just narrowed your vision to one possibility of what you probably think it is. Listen to yourself in your own head, listen to others saying it, and then take a step and ask, what else could this possibly
Got a great
be?
example here. EVA 23, you just saw the story. EVA 35, so 12 EVAs later, during the EVA, one of the astronauts started feeling water in the back of his helmet. Luckily, it was near the end of an EVA. It was close to the airlock. We got him inside. Wasn't anything like what Luca went through. When we got inside, we started looking. We ran some tests. We confirmed that it was not the issue that caused EVA 23, and we knew it wasn't that at all. And so eventually, we did enough study to realize that it was just a situation where we had a hot environment, a new crew member, he sweated a lot, he was running hot, we were working him hard. We had a device inside called a sublimator. That particular sublimator wasn't quite as efficient as the others, and it led to a little bit of water getting his helmet. We got comfortable that that was the answer. Come EVA 80, a couple months ago, some of you maybe have heard this in the news, that we are essentially no-go for our EVAs right now. At the end of that EVA, we also found a significant amount of water. And some of the echoes we started hearing from our team was this. It's probably, it's the same sublimator. And it was the same sublimator. It's probably just that. We called a halt to our team. And actually me and the other program managers, the station program manager, stopped and pulled everybody. And we actually went through this same EVA 23 presentation again, because again, this happened long enough ago that half our team members weren't there when EVA 23 happened. We reminded them of this. And we are going back and making sure that this is not what we're doing to ourselves. In fact, it could be that issue. It might be, but we can't go into that problem thinking that, or we will miss something bigger and better. And in fact, we found some things that we think will make us safer going forward in EVAs.
Awesome. Okay, final challenge, the dark space. Please click once. Look at that now.
There you go.
What? There we go.
Okay, final challenge or strategy is that time matters. So let's talk a little bit about time. Time matters a lot when we're dealing with uncertainty because the world has a certain tempo that we cannot control. So we have to decide, are we going to pause or are we going to speed up our response? How soon do we notice? How soon do we act? The more time that passes, the more things change. So even though we can illuminate what's happening, darkness creeps back in. So uncertainty creeps back in with time. It can't be vanished. It can just be chased away. And that's why we must be continually aware and cognizant of time passing and think about how that impacts the problem that we're trying to solve.
All right, so let's talk about the don't do's.
Okay, the don't do's. These are the things that you don't want to do. You don't want to get fixated on a point in time. Time can feel like it stops. You can have delays or we wait. Sometimes we tunnel our attention, and there have been situations where the pilots became so fixated on the controls in the airplane that they flew the plane into the ground. Another thing that we do is once we're on a path, we have a tendency to continue down that path. Sometimes that's called sunk cost or continuation bias. And we're afraid of slowing down. We're afraid of turning back. So we just continue down the path. We can't pause the tempo of the world, and we can't pause the tempo of a body that's failing at times. And Chris, did you have something you wanted to offer on this one?
Yeah, this one it's interesting because particularly when we're doing spacewalks, a lot of time this statement's true. I don't have time for this, because sometimes we don't. And so we live in that. It's one of the things that I think makes least when we do EVAs, more dangerous than a lot of the things we do, because we are in a dangerous situation every time we go out the door, even if everything's working perfectly, because we can't control everything. The biggest risk we're worried about is our astronauts getting hit with a micrometeoroid and putting a hole in their suit. We have almost nothing we can do to help that. So we have to be ready for, we have contingencies in place to get them in, but if it's a big enough hit, it's just a risk that we're taking. So sometimes we don't have time to just stop what we're doing all the time. So we have to continually kind of walk that balance of when is it we really don't have time versus when are we just rushing through because we're in a hurry for other reasons.
Okay.
All right, so what do we want to do? What strategies do we want to employ? Number one, act early. Resilience engineering says when you wait until you're certain, it may be too late. So waiting until you're certain may be too late. We consider the trajectory and rate of change. How fast could things go south? And now I'm going to give you another Lewis tool. So we invented a tool called Press Pause, and it has been incredible. So we all have all stops, right? We all say everybody has the right to stop work. But the thing is, that's usually a big deal. That's like blow the whistle, everybody come together. But press pause means, wait, hang on, I'm feeling uncertain. Hang on, our plan just changed. Hang on, the wind just picked up. We press pause, and then we come together and we replan work. So press pause has been a really critical tool for us. And to you, Chris, did you have anything on this one? You don't have to have anything. Okay.
Okay, so all of these strategies, individual strategies and organizational strategies, are summed up in your strategy sheet. And we're just hoping that today, this is a little joke I made with Beth, like, if I could make a pair of glasses for you that helped you see the dark space, what would they do? She's like, oh, well, I can see in the dark. It'll automatically remove my blind spot, zoom in, zoom out. I'll have X-ray vision. It'll help me see the path forward. Now that's a tall order, but there are things we can do to help so that we can be working in a better set of glasses. Here's your strategy sheet, and then we're going to go into questions for Chris. If any of you would like to have one to download or pass on, you can just use that QRS code. And then the fun part, forget me and Beth, talk to Chris.
Yeah, so we'd like to
Questions?
invite Mark back up to the stage, and now we have about 10 minutes for questions or any other comments that the two of them would like to make. The floor is yours.
Questions?
Beth, you had talked about the uneasiness.
Wait, you're not done.
You can ask Beth questions too. That's good.
Yeah. Notice when you're uncertain, never seen that before. A lot of new people, that's easy for them to see. And what I'm finding is they defer to the expertise. And the expert who's been there 30 years says, oh, I've seen that before. I think it's this. And they trust the deference to the expertise. Sometimes that's where it is. How do you manage really keeping that uncertainty going, even when somebody has seen something similar like it before?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we actually support deference to expertise. And the way it usually plays out for us is the crew will call the general foreman, and they might bring another crew who's nearby over. So we try to encourage them to get multiple sets of eyes on a situation if a person's feeling that uncertain. Or like the example I shared, if they're feeling uncertain, we adjust the work. Like we took the climber out of the tree, or we brought another crew over to fell the tree. I don't know if that answered your questions.
Do you have any cases where that did not work and still went south?
Oh, good golly. I'm sure we have.
Chris is saying yes.
Yeah, I'm sure. So in our world, the answer to that, one of the things that we did after Columbia is we created this concept called technical authorities. I have an engineering technical authority. I have a safety technical authority. Those are very experienced senior engineers that have that kind of experience you're talking about. And they are separate from the programs on purpose. They are there to be a kind of check and balance with the program managers whose job is to get the mission done. Now they want to do it safely as well, but their job is really to get it done. So our technical authorities focus on that. And we work really hard to make sure our technical authorities don't fall into that. In fact, I'm kind of a fan. I was the engineering technical authority for Space Station for a long time. And after about 7 or 8 years, when I caught myself doing that, oh yeah, that's a failure. I've seen that a bunch of times. it was time for me to move on. It was time for me to actually go do a different job. And so we have to be really conscious about making sure even our experts don't fall into these same patterns that we talked about are the issue, because it's human. It's not an experience thing. It's not like once you have 30 years of experience, you won't suffer any of these problems that Beth and Laurin are talking. Oh, yeah, absolutely you will, because you're still human. You're still a person. You'll still suffer from that. So I think you have to be really conscious about how you address that.
I was just wondering if you could just go into a bit more detail around the water in the helmet.
What happened? Well, what caused it?
No, actually, because when you shouted out the answer, you said what was unexpected, and you said that the water in the helmet was unexpected. It was just two things, really. It didn't feel like they reacted in a way that the water was unexpected.
Yep.
So is that true, or was it just that the volume and the continuing presence of the water was the surprise?
Two good questions, and I'm going to talk about normalization of deviance because there's two great examples, and that was one of them. One of them is the CO2 sensor. To understand why the CO2 sensor was so important, you have to understand a little bit how the spacesuits work. They're in essentially a balloon, and if we pressurize that suit up to 14.7 psi, the air pressure, they wouldn't be able to move. It would be they'd be fighting it the whole time. So we actually lower the pressure in the suit down to about 3.5, 4 pounds per square inch. Well, at 4 pounds per square inch, if you were breathing regular air, you'd be dead very quickly. You'd be unconscious immediately. You'd be dead very quickly. So we actually run those suits with 100% pure oxygen inside. At 100% pure O2, you can actually live at 4 psi just fine. Unfortunately, what happens is you breathe out, your body metabolizes that oxygen into other things, and one of those being carbon dioxide, which is very poisonous. And so as the CO2 works its way through the system, we scrub it out, but we have a little sensor in the system that helps us monitor the CO2 levels. And that sensor doesn't like to get wet. But at the end of a very long EVA, 6-7 hours, moisture can just naturally build up in the system, and it can condense on that little sensor, and it fails in a way that we've kind of seen before. But it's always happened at the end of a very long EVA. This EVA 23, it happened 38 minutes into the EVA. And not a single person on the ground of the hundreds of people who were experts on EVA watching this went, wow, 38 minutes versus 6 hours. Is it telling us something? Everybody missed it because we were just used to CO2 sensors. So in fact, you saw Luca goes, CO2 sensor's bad. My checklist says keep going. As long as I feel fine, we're good. So we missed it. The other thing is the water. Having water in your helmet in a spacesuit is never a good thing. But we have a suit, we used to call it the spitter. 3008 was the number designation. At the end of a long EVA, you get enough moisture just from natural condensation in the system. Gets a little bit into the helmet. We get something on the order of a marble or a golf ball size, a bit of water in the helmet. We saw that enough times that we convinced ourselves that that was okay because it never caused a problem. It never hurt anybody. It was never an issue. And I think that is really the primary cause that took us 23 minutes to terminate the EVA. We should have, as soon as Luca said, man, there's water in my helmet. What the hell? That's not good. Come back inside, Luca. Especially at 44 minutes. But I think we were so convinced, we were so used to that being just a normal condition, we convinced ourselves that that was okay. Two perfect examples of normalization of deviance.
The idea of the uncertainty gauge interested me. So real quick, is that just is that a feeling they have, something that is kind of a subjective thing?
It is subjective. And that's the point of it, because I think another thing that Todd said is that uncertainty is in the eye of the beholder. And so we're not looking for everyone to have the same number, because what it is it frames out a conversation. And the conversation frames out, it enables everyone to say, oh, here's how I do it. Here's how I do it. Some of them may have a plan that they have more control. Some of them may have more experience. So you're really essentially trying to frame a conversation where they're talking about control, how much can I control it, and the method that they bring it down. And, it'll vary based on the experience level of the person. So absolutely subjective.
Okay, I just had one question. Since that happened and you've had other instances of water, how do they handle it to this day when they get the presence of water in the suit? They seriously change that? They consider it a lot more critical?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So what you don't see is we've actually changed, coming out of this incident, we changed literally hundreds of things. It completely changed the way we do not only spacewalks, the way we do every critical operation on board space station. In fact, my boss at the time said, look, I want you to go tell us how to get better at this, but what I really want you to do, Bill Gerstenmaier, who was the head of human spaceflight at the time, called this incident a gift, because he'd lived through the incidents where we killed astronauts. And in this case, we didn't kill Luca, and we didn't hurt him. He goes, this is a gift that we must take advantage of. And so we use that to change, like I said, literally hundreds of things. A few things you see from the movie, the fact that Chris and Luca's tethers were routed differently. We don't do that anymore. We keep them closer together. There's a snorkel that we put inside the suit that even if through all our best efforts, water got in there, they have a way to keep their breathing path open. We have an absorption pad in the back that allows the crews to absorb water. We have changed procedures all through the whole system. We've taken this very seriously, even though on EVA 80, we got more water in there than we like. We have stopped doing EVAs for the moment until we go make sure that we, by God, understand this issue. Turns out we actually had seen this problem that happened in EVA 23 earlier on the ground. And we knew that water could get in there the way it did. We assumed, though, that if that happened, what would happen is the water would hit the little fan blades and it would stop the fan, which is not a good thing because you need air circulating, but we knew how to deal with it because there's 100 things that can stop that fan from spinning. Turns out in zero gravity, that's not what happened. The water managed to find a way around the fan blade. When it happened on the ground, it always stalled out that fan. So it was a lack of imagination. We didn't understand how in that really complex environment, water was going to behave. We know a lot about surface tension and we've been playing with water and space for a long time, but it was just such a complex environment. We misunderstood how it was going to manifest itself in this way. So yes, absolutely, we treat it much differently, but I would say not even just that. We've really taken those lessons and applied them to a lot of sort of more dynamic things that we do on board space station. And in fact, in the new suits we've designed, we've actually designed out a lot of these failures in the next gen suits that we're building now. They're actually, the water and the vent loops are physically separated by structure. So there's actually no way for them to get in unless we had a structural failure. Now we're worried about being too dry, but if you grow up out here where the humidity is like 0, unlike Houston, I think they'll be all right.
We have a few more seconds. One thing, can I add one thing that really struck me? Oh, I'm having trouble. Beth and I met in Sturbridge and we were working on this and we rewatched it. And I said, you know, what's so interesting, so we have hundreds of engineers. They knew there was 800 milliliters of water in there. And for 23 minutes, their question was, where could it possibly be coming from? And what if they had asked, what could possibly happen next now that there is water in there? And at one minute, projecting into the future probably would have made a big difference. So that's something you can think of. We want to thank you very much. Who thinks Mark Havicon should make movies for healthcare? Harm? Yes, yes, we'll be back. One more thing. Sorry, guys, but ladies, tomorrow we're going to have like a ladies lunch meet and greet for lunch. So if you head to the far back corner, there's like an elevated area. Let's all just get together there for a little while and meet each other. Let's give a big thank you. These guys did not have to do this. They didn't get paid, and there were such sports for us all.